Hey guys, tonight we are about to slip quietly into the glinting, suffocating darkness of an ancient tomb, the gold around you gleaming faintly in torchlight, each mask and treasure whispering secrets that were never meant for mortal ears. You hear the stillness pressing in, the air so heavy it tastes like the dust of centuries. A jeweled death mask stares back, its lips frozen in a faint, knowing smile, as if it remembers far more than it should. You probably won't survive this in one piece, at least, not in the same state of mind you started in. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unexpected, post your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gold masks of Egyptian pharaohs were not just for dazzling onlookers in the afterlife. They were a performance in metal, meant to preserve the ruler's beauty and project divine authority for eternity. You imagine yourself holding one, the weight pulling at your wrists, each intricate line echoing the human face beneath a face that, in life, might have been flushed from late-night intrigues in torchlit corridors. These masks weren't random art pieces. They were forged with alloys mixed in specific proportions to mimic the skin tone of gods, linking the ruler's flesh to the celestial. Historians still argue whether this choice of gold alloy had purely symbolic meaning, or if it carried a ritualistic function during intimate ceremonies while the ruler was alive. Think of the burial chamber as a stage set after the curtain has fallen, the actors gone, but the props hinting at the story. The most famous, Tutankhamun's mask, is an example you can't avoid. The lapis lazuli eyebrows and quartz eyes still seem to meet your gaze with unnerving intimacy, a reminder that in life, this boy king navigated both political and private pressures. His short reign didn't stop whispers of nighttime visits from older courtiers, arranged perhaps as political grooming wrapped in the silken thread of mentorship. One quirky tidbit buried in records. Certain artisans, sworn to secrecy, are thought to have embedded microscopic symbols inside the gold leaf, tiny glyphs visible only to someone who knew where to look. These may have been playful or intimate signatures for the ruler's eyes alone. Imagine you, as the pharaoh, tracing your finger over a mask and smiling at a secret no courtier dared to speak aloud. You walk further into the chamber. The air smells faintly metallic, mixed with the ghost of myrrh oil that once anointed the ruler's body. Containers shaped like lotuses, symbols of rebirth and sensual awakening, sit beside jars of perfumed ointment. You begin to realize that these weren't simply funerary goods, they were props from the ruler's most private performances, preserved for the eternal afterlife audience of the gods. It is here that gold and flesh, death and desire, met in a single space. And then there's the mask's fixed smile, so subtle yet suggestive. It tells you this ruler knew the power of stillness, of holding a gaze a fraction longer than comfort allows. In life, that smile might have been enough to shift alliances, to ignite jealousy, or to draw someone into a web of silk and ambition. The afterlife was not, in the Egyptian mind, a place of abstinence. Quite the opposite. It was an eternal continuation of life's pleasures, amplified and perfected. Gold preserved not just the ruler's face, but their right to enjoy those pleasures forever. The craftsmanship itself is almost a love letter. Every etched line, every polished surface reflects a world where artisans worked close to the ruler's skin, measuring, touching, adjusting. Those moments, repeated over days or weeks, could form a strange intimacy between creator and subject, especially when the ruler's image was tied to divinity. Was there tension in the air as the artisan worked along the curve of a cheek? Historians still argue whether the intimacy of such tasks was purely professional or quietly personal, a subtle crossing of boundaries hidden in the record. Standing here, in this imagined tomb, you feel the weight of both the gold and the stories it covers. The mask becomes more than an artifact, it's a locked door to a bedroom you'll never enter, guarded by centuries and sealed with rituals as binding as any vow, yet the details keep teasing you. A faint indentation on one mask suggests it was once worn in life, perhaps during a secret rite where the ruler played the role of Osiris or Horus, acting out divine passion for an audience of priests who understood every layered meaning. And here's where your mind drifts. Did those in the room feel awe or something closer to intrigue? Did the polished gold, catching firelight, blur the line between the sacred and the sensual? You picture the glimmer on skin, the faint rustle of linen, the measured chant of priests. Somewhere in that mix, gold became more than metal. It became a second skin, a promise, a seduction aimed not at mortals, but at gods themselves. The longer you stand in this tomb, the more you sense the overlapping truths. The pharaoh's gold mask wasn't just to frighten grave robbers or to honor tradition. It was a silent witness to a life where power, divinity, and desire intertwined so tightly you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. And as your torchlight flickers, you swear the mask's smile deepens, as if it knows you've started to understand. You leave the tomb's stillness and step into the living world of the palace, moving through shadowed corridors toward the heart of power, the sacred bedchamber. Here, the air feels heavier, perfumed with resins that cling to your skin. Torchlight bounces off polished alabaster walls, making everything look like it's glowing from within. You're reminded that this room is no ordinary place for sleep. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's bedchamber doubled as a temple of flesh and spirit, a stage where the ruler's private life and divine role blurred into one. The bed itself isn't the kind of thing you'd find in a modern showroom. It's raised high on carved legs shaped like lion paws, with headrests instead of pillows, and linen sheets embroidered with protective spells. Gold foil gleams along the frame, catching every flicker of light. Historians still argue whether the gilding was simply for aesthetic grandeur or intended to channel the sun god's energy directly into the pharaoh's body during intimate moments. The walls are painted with scenes that look harmless at first: lotus blooms, geese, pools, but in Egyptian symbolism, these are more than pretty pictures. They're layered messages, suggesting fertility, pleasure, and the renewal of cosmic order. One mainstream historical fact is that royal bedchambers often faced east, so that the first rays of the rising sun could touch the ruler directly upon waking. This was not just symbolic, it was part of the daily recharging of divine authority, a reminder that the pharaoh was the living embodiment of Horus by day and Osiris by night. And yes, that night role came with expectations. You imagine waking here as the sun spills over you, a priest entering quietly to offer incense, the faint murmur of blessings mixing with the rustle of linen. A quirky tidbit hidden in less celebrated papyri tells of a bedchamber door fitted with a rattle-like latch. Every time it opened, the sound was distinct, ensuring no one could slip in unnoticed. Was it purely for security? Or was it also a kind of public announcement? You can picture the gossip outside the chamber, the quick glances between servants when that latch rattled at odd hours. The bedchamber wasn't just for the ruler's rest or pleasure, it was a political arena. Invitations here could secure alliances or cement loyalty. A noble granted private audience might leave with more than a clasped hand or a kind word. Egyptian court etiquette allowed for certain honored guests to be entertained in ways that both flattered and bound them to the throne. You can almost hear the careful tone of such an invitation, half formal, half laced with an unspoken possibility. The lighting here plays its own role. Oil lamps with polished reflectors create pools of gold light, focusing attention on the bed's center while leaving the corners in shadow. You wonder if the darkness at the edges was deliberate, a place for servants, guards, or perhaps the occasional hidden observer. Historians still argue whether this chamber's design was purely ceremonial or intentionally theatrical, meant to elevate every private act into something worthy of the god's attention. And then there's the fabric. Linen in ancient Egypt could be sheer enough to see light through, its softness achieved by countless hours of hand-twisting flax fibers. Drapes hung from the bed frame not for warmth, but for the choreography of unveiling a slow, deliberate revelation of the ruler's form. You picture the movement, the curtains sliding aside, the rustle of cloth, the faint scent of blue lotus oil rising like a sigh. One wall might display an image of Hathor, goddess of love and music, depicted with a sistrum in her hand. The sound of this rattle was said to delight the gods, and perhaps the pharaoh's partners too. Imagine the rhythm of a sistrum echoing in this chamber, not loud enough to be heard across the palace, but enough to set a pace. That blend of sound, scent, and sight created an environment where every sense was heightened, and where the boundary between mortal and divine seemed to melt away. You can't help noticing that even the floor beneath your feet is a message. Inlays of ebony and ivory form patterns of rebirth and union. Each step toward the bed is a symbolic crossing into sacred territory, a journey from the political world outside to the intimate rituals within. Even in the absence of its original occupants, the space hums with an energy you can feel in your bones. And here's where you find yourself wondering, how many of these details were genuinely about faith, and how many were carefully engineered tools of seduction? Perhaps in this room those two goals were never truly separate. The pharaoh's bedchamber was a living metaphor, sleep, desire, and divine renewal bound in one breath. And as you take one last glance at the lion-pawed bed, you can almost hear the latch rattle again, the faint creak of wood, and the slow closing of a door on secrets the walls still keep. You leave the glow of the royal bedchamber and step into an even stranger realm, one where family trees grow in neat, tight loops instead of sprawling branches. In ancient Egypt, incest among the royal family wasn't whispered about as a scandal. It was celebrated as a divine law. You walk down a colonnade, lined with statues of pharaohs holding hands with their sisters, their expressions carved into the same serene authority as if this union were as natural as the Nile's flood. One mainstream historical fact is that pharaohs often married their full sisters or half-sisters to keep the royal bloodline pure. In their worldview, this wasn't just politics, it was theology. The gods themselves, like Osiris and Isis, were siblings, and the royal family mirrored the divine family to legitimize their rule. This meant the king and queen were not just spouses but living symbols of cosmic balance. You feel the weight of that expectation, the way every glance between them in public was as much performance as it was partnership. But here's a quirky tidbit records hint that not all sibling unions were harmonious. Some inscriptions have been deliberately scratched out, erasing one partner's name entirely, as if to pretend the marriage never happened. Was this political erasure, or the ancient equivalent of a messy breakup? You can almost hear the awkward silence at dinner in a palace courtyard, the tension hanging as heavily as the heat. Historians still argue whether these sibling marriages were primarily about consolidating political power or truly seen as spiritually necessary. The line between the two could blur easily. A young prince might grow up knowing that his bride would almost certainly be his sister, shaping both his private feelings and public duties from the start. Imagine being groomed for power while also being reminded, in quiet hallways and family gatherings, that your future queen is sitting right across the table. The art of the time makes no effort to hide these unions. You see wall paintings of royal couples clasping hands, standing side by side with identical crowns, their feet aligned to show equality. The messages are clear. This is unity, not taboo. But you can't help thinking of the human side, the moments when a brother might have wanted to marry for love, or when a sister might have looked at foreign envoys with curiosity. You picture the wedding ceremonies themselves. The smell of lotus blossoms fills the temple, and priests chant blessings drawn from myths. The bride's gold collar catches the sunlight, casting small flashes of light onto her brother's chest. The guests, nobles, foreign dignitaries, temple officials watch closely, not for romance, but for signs that the gods approve. In that setting, personal feelings become part of a much larger performance, and the couple's intimacy is just another ritual for state stability. Still, the private chambers after the ceremony are a mystery. Did the divinity of the act make it easier, or did the weight of expectation make the room feel colder? You imagine a guarded tenderness, two people who have known each other since childhood navigating a role that blurs sibling and spouse. Maybe they talk quietly about their childhood games before the mood shifts toward fulfilling their sacred duty. There are also moments in the records when sibling unions brought unexpected complications. If the royal couple failed to produce an heir, the fault could be blamed on divine displeasure, and that displeasure could translate into political instability. Suddenly, whispers in the harem might grow louder, and the council of priests might suggest new blessings to remedy the situation, blessings that conveniently involved other potential partners. In the hush of the palace gardens, you imagine a sister queen walking alone at dusk, her jewelry muted in the fading light. She stops to watch ibis birds by the water, her mind turning over the many roles she plays: wife, sister, queen, mother-to-be or not. Somewhere beyond the colonnade, the pharaoh appears, his footsteps slow, the space between them heavy with both shared history and the knowledge that their marriage is as much for the gods as for themselves. The practice may seem alien to modern sensibilities, but in this world, it was an unshakable pillar of divine kingship. And as you step back from the colonnade into the echoing heart of the palace, you can feel how tightly this belief bound love, duty, and power into one inescapable knot. You follow the faint echo of drums down a wide avenue, the air thick with dust and anticipation. The city is awake in a different way tonight. Lanterns sway from poles, casting long shadows across the crowd. You've stumbled into one of the great fertility festivals, and already you can feel the energy pulling you forward. In ancient Egypt, these festivals were more than public celebrations. They were state-sponsored performances, blending religion, politics, and a very deliberate undercurrent of sensuality. One mainstream historical fact is that the festival of Min, the god of fertility, involved grand processions where the pharaoh himself took part in rituals symbolizing virility and agricultural abundance. The ruler might be seen holding a ceremonial flail or an offering of lettuce. Yes, lettuce, because in Egyptian symbolism, it was linked to male potency. You can't help but smirk at the thought of a vegetable carrying such a heavy symbolic load. The parade moves slowly, with dancers dressed in sheer linen swaying to the beat of frame drums. The music is hypnotic, repetitive enough to sink into your bones. Priests carry statues of the god, decorated with garlands, while incense smoke curls into the night air. Historians still argue whether the more provocative aspects of these festivals were meant to inspire the crowd's faith, or simply to entertain them in ways that kept loyalty to the throne burning. A quirky tidbit from some festival records tells of contests held after the main procession, athletic challenges that, in certain years, included symbolic acts, meant to display physical strength and endurance in a not-so-subtle nod to the ruler's personal vitality. Imagine the political advantage of winning such contests in front of thousands, the message sinking in without a single word spoken. As you watch, you notice how every element of the festival serves multiple purposes. The rhythmic drumming might be an offering to the gods, but it also stirs the blood of the crowd. The dancers' movements are religious gestures on paper, yet the shapes they make are unmistakably suggestive. You picture yourself standing near the front, close enough to see the flash of bracelets and the play of lamplight on oiled skin. Even the layout of the festival grounds plays into the symbolism. The central avenue leads straight to the temple, but along the way are alcoves where performers step aside for smaller, more intimate rituals. You pass one and catch the murmur of chants, the smell of perfumed wine, the flicker of a torch revealing a priestess placing a garland over someone's shoulders. The pharaoh appears at the far end of the avenue, his arrival marked by a louder, faster rhythm. He walks slowly, acknowledging the crowd, his ceremonial kilt and elaborate crown gleaming under torchlight. You realize that tonight, he's not just the ruler, he's the embodiment of the land's fertility, a living bridge between the people and the gods. Every step he takes is meant to reassure the crowd that the cycles of life, death, and rebirth will continue without interruption. The night deepens, and the music swells. Somewhere in the shadows, offerings are being made: grain, beer, honey, incense, all symbols of nourishment and pleasure. You imagine the after-parties in courtyards and gardens, where laughter mingles with the low hum of more private conversations. In these spaces, deals are struck. alliances are cemented, and the festival's sensual energy seeps into political life. You can almost feel the pull of the festival yourself, the way it blurs lines between sacred duty and human desire. In the glow of firelight, with drums echoing in your chest, it's easy to understand how these events could renew not just faith in the gods, but also loyalty to the ruler who seemed to command the very cycles of nature. And as the last of the dancers disappear into the temple gates, you realize that the festival's most important work is just beginning out of sight, in the hush of private chambers where the gods alone are witness. The festival's echo fades behind you, replaced by the rush of water and the thick, warm scent of the river. You find yourself standing on the bank of a canal lit by moonlight, where crocodiles move silently just beneath the surface. Tonight, the air hums with devotion to Sobek, the crocodile-headed god, whose worship entwined raw power, danger, and fertility into one magnetic presence. One mainstream historical fact is that Sobek's cult was strongest in regions like the Fayum, where crocodiles were not just feared but revered. Temples kept live crocodiles in sacred pools, feeding them lavishly and adorning them with gold and jeweled collars. To honor Sobek was to honor the primal forces of life and death, forces that, in the Egyptian mind, were as much about creation as they were about destruction. The ceremonies held in his name could be strangely intimate affairs. Priests processed to the water's edge, carrying offerings, fresh meat, fragrant flowers, and jars of sweet wine, while the crowd chanted invocations. Historians still argue whether some of these rites included symbolic acts by the pharaoh himself, intended to display virility in alignment with Sobek's fearsome masculinity. The god's link to the Nile tied him directly to the land's fertility. To channel his power was to guarantee both crops and heirs. A quirky tidbit from temple accounts describes an unusual practice. During certain moonlit ceremonies, young women chosen from the temple attendants would wade into shallow water, scattering petals while singing to the crocodiles. The act was said to soften the god's temper and invite his blessing on human unions. You imagine the mix of thrill and terror: bare feet sinking into river mud, unseen shapes moving in the dark, the eyes of the god's emissaries glinting just above the waterline. In the heart of the ceremony, the pharaoh would sometimes present a symbolic gift, a carved ivory depiction of a crocodile intertwined with a lotus stem. To the uninitiated, it was just an elegant artifact. To those present, it was a declaration of the ruler's mastery over both the dangerous and the desirable. Standing there, you sense how these offerings were as much about personal allure as they were about divine duty. The setting itself lent the rites an undeniable tension. Torches cast wavering light across the river's surface, making it hard to tell where water ended and sky began. Priests chanted in deep, measured tones, their voices carrying over the water while the smell of incense mixed with the faint, sharp scent of reptile musk. You can almost feel the goosebumps rising on your arms as the ceremony builds toward its unseen climax. The connection between Sobek and human sensuality wasn't subtle. The crocodile's dominance over its environment, its swift, decisive power, made it a potent symbol for male potency in Egyptian iconography. Statues of Sobek often show him with an erect posture, chest thrust forward, radiating an energy that was meant to be both intimidating and alluring. As the night deepens, the crowd thins, leaving only priests, attendants, and the ruler by the water's edge. The river moves slower now, the moon high overhead, casting silver light that seems to turn the pharaoh's skin into bronze. You watch as he dips his hands into the water, then lifts them toward the sky, a gesture binding himself to Sobek's domain. Whether or not this act held private significance for the ruler, the image it projected was clear. Here stood a man who could command even the crocodile god's favor. When you finally turn away, the sound of the water follows you, mingling with the distant growl of a crocodile. The air feels charged, as if you've stepped through a veil into a place where danger and desire are one and the same, and where the blessing of a god might carry more than just spiritual weight. You follow the river downstream until the torches of the temple fade and the air changes warmer, tinged with spices you don't recognize. The soft shuffle of sandals on stone tells you you're nearing the royal docks, where foreign barges are moored, their decks laden with gifts from faraway lands. Tonight, the palace is expecting a guest, and the atmosphere carries that electric edge that comes when diplomacy and desire walk hand in hand. One mainstream historical fact is that marriages between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign princesses were vital tools of diplomacy. These unions brought peace treaties, trade rights, and sometimes entire territories under Egyptian influence. But with them came an exchange of customs, rituals, fashions, even bedroom practices that might have been unfamiliar or enticingly exotic to the Egyptian court. You imagine the stir in the harem when word spreads that a princess from a distant kingdom has arrived, her servants carrying chests of silk, rare oils, and perfumes no one in the Nile Valley has ever smelled before. A quirky tidbit comes from the Amarna letters clay tablets recording diplomatic correspondence where a foreign queen complained that she'd been sent fewer gold gifts than she expected. It's not hard to imagine her making her point with more than just words, perhaps weaving her disappointment into a calculated display of charm and cool defiance at the next feast. You can picture the way such tensions might play out behind closed doors, where subtle gestures carried more weight than outright demands. Historians still argue whether these imported brides kept their homeland's traditions in private or adopted Egyptian ways entirely. Some may have blended the two, creating a fusion of rituals that became their personal signature. Imagine a candlelit chamber where the scent of myrrh mingles with something sharper and spicier from across the desert, the fabrics layered in unfamiliar patterns, the music plucked from foreign strings instead of Egyptian harps. You picture the arrival feast. Long tables piled with pomegranates, honeyed figs, roasted duck, and bowls of fragrant stews. Musicians from both cultures take turns, their rhythms weaving together into something neither side has heard before. The pharaoh, seated in a high-backed chair inlaid with lapis, watches the new bride as she lifts a goblet, the gold catching the light on her fingers. Every gesture is deliberate, how she tilts her head when she speaks, how she meets his gaze for just a heartbeat longer than protocol demands. Later, in the privacy of the royal quarters, these imported customs might become intimate tools of influence. A foreign queen might introduce a new oil for anointing, a song meant to be sung only between lovers, or a particular way of sharing wine from the same cup. To the pharaoh, these novelties could be as intoxicating as the political alliance itself. And yet, beneath the romance, there's always the undercurrent of strategy. This queen isn't here only for companionship. She's here as a living treaty, her body and presence binding two nations together. Every private interaction has public consequences. If affection grows between them, it could mean stronger ties. If tension rises, the ripples might reach the borders. You think of the queen's own position far from home, surrounded by a court that may or may not welcome her. She must learn quickly which servants can be trusted, which priests whisper to the pharaoh, and which ladies in the harem might see her as a rival. She must use every charm, every inherited custom, to secure her place. By the time the night winds down, you can almost hear the quiet conversations in shadowed balconies and secluded gardens. The pharaoh's laughter drifts through the warm air, mingling with the steady beat of drums somewhere far off. You leave the scene with the sense that while political treaties might be written in ink, the most lasting ones were sealed in candlelight and perfumed air, with no witnesses but the moon. The morning after the foreign queen's arrival, the palace wakes to a softer sound, flutes weaving through the air like threads of light. You follow the music toward the eastern wing, where the temple dancers are preparing for their dawn ceremony. The courtyard smells of warmed milk and crushed lotus petals, the kind of scent that lingers on skin long after the water has dried. These dancers are not mere entertainers. In the world of ancient Egypt, movement could be an offering as sacred as any prayer. Records from temple reliefs show how choreographed gestures mirrored cosmic events: the rising of the sun, the flooding of the Nile, the union of deities. The first light of Ra was believed to awaken not only the world but also the deeper forces of fertility. Here, at dawn, bodies move as living invocations. Among the performers are women trained from childhood in the precise steps and fluid hand shapes that tell entire stories without a single word. The thin linen of their costumes clings with dew as they sway in rhythm, feet dusted with fine sand that glitters faintly in the growing light. Some wear elaborate wigs braided with gold wire, each movement catching the sun in a way that seems almost hypnotic. An unusual detail from a papyrus fragment describes how certain dancers were chosen not only for their skill, but also for their connection to the temple's inner rites. They might serve as ceremonial attendants during high holy days, carrying incense or pouring wine in the pharaoh's presence. The role placed them close enough to hear whispered instructions, to see exchanges of glances that others would miss. For a few, those moments may have opened doors to more private invitations later. Scholars still debate whether the most talented dancers were ever sent as subtle messengers between temple and palace. It's not difficult to picture a performance where the choreography itself carried a coded message, perhaps a shift in the pacing of a turn, a gesture held just long enough for one pair of eyes to notice. The sound of sistrums rattles gently through the courtyard. You watch as the lead dancer raises her arms toward the sun, her shadow stretching across the polished limestone. The energy in the space changes. The priests nearby lower their heads. The servants pause in their work. This is no casual display. The dancers' bodies are channeling something older and larger than themselves. As the performance reaches its peak, the air thickens with incense, and the flutes fade into the steady beat of a single drum. Each strike seems to slow the world around you. You feel yourself being drawn into their rhythm, as if you've stumbled into the center of a spell. In that suspended moment, you understand why the pharaoh might choose to attend in person, to watch from a shaded balcony where he could remain unseen, yet still feel the pull of the dance. Not all of these ceremonies ended in public blessing. Some carried on into the more private chambers of the temple, where the dancers could rest and recover. There, away from the crowd, conversations might begin. Quietly questions about the performance, gentle praise for a particularly graceful turn, perhaps an invitation to serve at a feast that evening. You can imagine the mix of nerves and anticipation such an offer might spark. Even the setting feels carefully arranged for more than worship. Low basins of water reflect the sunrise, doubling its light and softening its edges. The columns are carved with images of Hathor, goddess of love and joy, whose presence turns any ritual into a celebration of life's pleasures. A careful observer might notice how the dancers pass close to certain doorways, how their paths curve toward the corridors that lead directly to the royal wing. By the time the ceremony ends, the courtyard is bright with full daylight. The dancers bow low, their movements slowing until they are almost still, the final notes fading like breath on glass. You can almost see the tension in the space, a mixture of reverence and something warmer, unspoken, lingering just beneath the surface. As you step away, the sound of the sistrum still rings faintly in your ears. It's easy to imagine that for some in the audience, those dawn performances were more than acts of devotion. They were invitations subtle, elegant, and impossible to forget. And for the pharaoh, perhaps the real ritual began not at sunrise in the courtyard, but later, in a chamber scented with lotus, where the memory of those movements still shimmered in the air. The bright morning dissolves into the hush of an inner palace courtyard, shaded by date palms and enclosed by high limestone walls. Here, behind carved wooden doors, lies the royal harem, a world invisible to most, and yet central to the balance of power. The stillness is deceptive. Behind the soft chatter and the shuffle of silk slippers, entire political games are in motion. The harem was far from the idle paradise that outsiders might imagine. In Egypt's royal court, it was a carefully managed institution filled with wives, concubines, children, and the women who served them. Official records describe it as both a domestic sanctuary and a state tool. Every woman within had her own status, privileges, and alliances, and those alliances could be as sharp as any soldier's blade. A rare note from the Harris papyrus mentions a chief wife, directing the affairs of the women's quarters, keeping strict account of gifts, visitors, and correspondence. From the outside, it might seem like harmless bookkeeping, but here, control over who had the pharaoh's ear and at what hour was as potent as control over gold. Some women in the harem were foreign princesses brought in through treaties, others daughters of noble families offered as gestures of loyalty, and a select few were temple-trained attendants whose service extended beyond ritual duties. Every arrival shifted the harem's balance, sparking whispered alliances and subtle rivalries. You can imagine the silent glances across the courtyard, a lowered eyelid here, a perfectly timed smile there, each gesture part of a larger conversation. What is less commonly discussed is how the harem could influence state policy. A favored consort might casually mention her family's concerns during a private moment, planting seeds of thought that would later bloom in the council chamber. Scholars still debate how much of Egypt's diplomacy was quietly shaped by these private voices, spoken softly behind cedar screens. An unusual episode recorded during the reign of Ramesses III shows just how dangerous this hidden world could be. A group of harem women, allied with certain palace officials, plotted to assassinate the pharaoh. Their goal was to elevate one woman's son to the throne. The plot failed, but the records etched in the judicial papyrus of Turin show how a whisper in the wrong ear could shift the fate of an entire kingdom. You walk deeper into the courtyard, where the air smells faintly of honeyed bread cooling on clay trays. Women recline on cushions, embroidering linen or combing one another's hair. The picture looks serene, yet you can sense the undercurrent. Every shared meal, every compliment, every gift of perfume is an investment, an unspoken contract that might be called upon later. At the far end of the space, there's a small arched door leading to a shaded antechamber. This is where the pharaoh's attendants might quietly inform a woman that she has been summoned. The summons could mean anything: a request to join him at a feast, an evening of music, or a private conversation late at night. And in this world, a single night could change everything. A rival's influence could fade overnight, or a family's fortune could double. The architecture itself seems to encourage intrigue. Long colonnades allow for discreet exchanges out of earshot, while the central pool offers a place to display beauty under the pretext of bathing. Sunlight dances on the water, catching in droplets along the women's arms, their laughter echoing across the courtyard. To an outsider, it's just a pleasant afternoon. To someone living here, every detail could be a calculated move. Leaving the harem, you realize you've stepped out of one of the palace's most potent arenas, not of swords and shields, but of charm, wit, and influence. The politics here are just as fierce, the stakes just as high, and the victories often sealed not with treaties, but with a glance held a moment too long. The air in the harem courtyard fades behind you, replaced by a swirl of fragrances as you enter the palace's perfumery, a vaulted chamber where light filters through latticed windows and dances across rows of alabaster jars. Here, the art of scent becomes a language as deliberate as any royal decree. Perfume in ancient Egypt was more than personal adornment. It was sacred, political, and deeply intimate. Recipes for unguents and oils were guarded like state secrets, passed from temple scribes to palace specialists. Inscriptions from Edfu and Philae record blends of myrrh, cinnamon, and blue lotus oil, each carrying a specific purpose, some to please the gods, others to entice mortals. The perfumers worked under the authority of the high priests, yet their creations often found their way into the pharaoh's most private moments. One rare reference on an ostracon describes a jar of kifi, an aromatic compound of over a dozen ingredients gifted by a temple priestess directly to the ruler. It was officially for nighttime meditation, but its warm, resinous scent was also believed to stir desire. You imagine the quiet exchange, a sealed jar handed over in a shaded hallway, the faintest smile passing between giver and receiver, both aware of the oil's other associations. Scholars still discuss whether these fragrances were meant to be worn daily or saved for highly charged occasions. Given the value of certain ingredients, like imported frankincense or rare balsam, Their use may have been restricted to events where presence and memory mattered most: ceremonies, negotiations, or intimate encounters. The perfumery itself is a sensory labyrinth. Wide bronze basins bubble with melting beeswax, into which crushed petals and spices are stirred with long cedar rods. Steam rises, carrying a sweetness that clings to your skin. In the corner, strips of linen soak in oil, ready to be wrapped around small clay pellets that will later release scent when warmed by the body. The connection between perfume and power was understood by everyone in the court. A distinct fragrance could become a signature, instantly recognized before the wearer even entered a room. Imagine the effect servants pausing as a familiar scent precedes the pharaoh's appearance, courtiers exchanging knowing glances when a rare perfume drifts across the banquet hall. In a world without photographs, smell was a kind of identity. A quirky bit of folklore whispers that certain blends were so potent they were said to confuse the heart of the one who inhaled them. Whether or not this was superstition, it's not difficult to picture a ruler keeping such a vial close, ready to tip the scales in a delicate meeting. Even the containers tell a story. Some are shaped like lilies or papyrus stalks, carved to fit perfectly in a hand. Others bear hieroglyphs spelling out blessings, love poems, or private jokes only the recipient would understand. A gift of perfume was never just a gift, it was a statement, a promise, or a reminder. As you leave the chamber, the air outside feels strangely plain, as if the scents inside had been weaving a spell you've only just stepped out of. You can still catch a trace of lotus oil clinging to your sleeve, faint but persistent, the way certain encounters in this palace linger in the mind long after they've ended. The perfume still clings to your senses as you move toward the river once more, this time to a long ceremonial quay lined with carved lotus columns. The air is cooler here, carrying the scent of wet reeds and fresh-cut papyrus. A barge waits at the water's edge, its prow gilded and shaped into the head of a falcon. The scene is set for a journey that is equal parts statecraft and seduction. Royal river voyages in ancient Egypt weren't mere transportation, they were floating theatres of power. Reliefs from temples at Luxor and Karnak depict the pharaoh traveling by night on sacred boats during festivals, accompanied by priests, musicians, and select companions. The official purpose might be to visit a shrine or deliver offerings, but the privacy of the water allowed for conversations and alliances away from the crowded palace. One festival in particular, honoring Hathor, goddess of love and joy, often involved nighttime journeys. The barge would drift under a canopy of stars, torches flickering along the deck, the steady rhythm of oars blending with the hum of voices. Attendants would bring wine mixed with honey, trays of pomegranates, and bowls of figs. It's easy to see how such a setting might turn ceremonial formality into something more personal. An unusual note from a fragmentary inscription hints at private suppers taken on the upper deck, where only the closest confidants were invited. These meals, shielded from the public eye by woven reed screens, were ideal for deepening trust or testing it. Scholars still debate whether these intimate gatherings were pre-planned diplomatic moves or spontaneous indulgences of the moment. You step aboard and feel the barge sway slightly underfoot. The deck planks are smooth with wear, polished by years of careful maintenance. Cushioned benches line the edges, their linen covers faintly scented with lotus oil from countless past voyages. At the center sits a low table laden with delicacies: roasted quail, dates stuffed with almonds, and flatbreads sprinkled with coriander seeds. As the oarsmen push off, the city's noise fades, replaced by the gentle slap of water against the hull. The moonlight casts a silver path ahead, as if inviting the journey deeper into its own secrets. You can imagine the pharaoh reclining against the cushions, cup in hand, speaking in a low voice to a guest, perhaps a foreign envoy, a favored consort, or even a temple priestess brought along under the guise of offering blessings. The setting is perfect for layered conversation. Words float between personal and political, wrapped in the safe anonymity of the night. A compliment about a guest's attire might lead to a discussion of trade goods. A shared joke could soften the edges of a tense negotiation. The wine helps, loosening voices and deepening laughter. A quirky mention in an old traveller's account describes the use of trained ibis birds on such voyages. Their sudden flight from the deck was taken as a favourable omen for whatever agreement was being discussed. You picture the moment, a bird's wings flashing white against the night sky, the ripple of approval moving across the deck, the pharaoh's eyes narrowing with satisfaction. By the time the barge turns back toward the palace, the guests are relaxed, their voices low. The lights of the city shimmer in the distance, mirrored in the black water. Perhaps a promise has been made tonight, spoken or unspoken, that will ripple through the court in days to come. As you step off the barge, the memory of the voyage lingers. It's not just the beauty of the moonlit river that stays with you, but the sense that these journeys were less about the destination and more about the subtle shifts in power, loyalty, and desire that could happen between the splash of the oars. The cool hush of the quay gives way to the warm glow of a gallery deep within the palace, its walls alive with painted animals, ibis, falcons, lions, bulls, and serpents moving across scenes of feast, hunt, and ritual. Here, nothing is drawn without meaning. In ancient Egypt, animals were more than decoration. They were codes, shorthand for traits, powers, and appetites that could not be spoken outright. Royal art often placed animals beside figures in ways that would have been immediately understood by the court. A falcon above the pharaoh's shoulder declared divine authority from Horus. A bull beneath his feet spoke of virility and strength. When a leopard was shown mid-pounce in a hunting scene, it was not just a record of sport, it was a subtle reminder of the ruler's ability to seize what he desired. In the intimacy of palace life, these symbols could be deliberately chosen for private chambers and gifts. A painted ostrich feather might signal a longing for balance or justice, but in certain contexts, it was a flirtatious nod to grace and allure. Scholars still puzzle over a series of small ivory plaques found in a royal storeroom, each carved with pairs of animals entwined, a lion and lioness, a cobra and her mate, images far too personal to be mere ornament. One rare anecdote from a surviving courtier's journal tells of a banquet where the pharaoh presented a foreign guest with a pendant in the shape of a gazelle. To the outsider, it seemed a pretty trinket. To those familiar with court symbolism, it was a delicate compliment, likening the guest's beauty to the elegance of the gazelle in love poetry. That guest reportedly wore it every day thereafter, even in the presence of rivals. The placement of these symbols inside private apartments was equally calculated. A low table might be inlaid with scenes of crocodiles in still water, a reminder of patience before sudden action. A painted screen could show a pair of cats under a flowering tree, an emblem of domestic comfort mixed with quiet passion. These choices weren't left to decorators. They were curated like lines in an unspoken letter. You walk slowly through the gallery, feeling the eyes of painted hawks follow you. The room smells faintly of cedar, the air carrying the dry rustle of papyrus stored in the niches along the walls. Every so often, you catch the gleam of gold leaf outlining a feather or scale, catching the lamplight in a way that makes the creatures seem almost alive. A particularly striking panel shows a bull mid-charge toward a woman holding a lotus. The scene is balanced so that their gazes meet just before the moment of contact. Was this a metaphor for courtship, for divine union, or for the unyielding force of royal will? The ambiguity is deliberate, leaving space for those in the know to project their own meanings. The deeper you go, the more you see how animal symbolism served as a safe language for delicate subjects. In a culture where the ruler was both mortal and divine, art became the perfect veil, expressing desire, rivalry, or intent, without ever putting it into dangerous words. When you finally step out into the corridor, the painted eyes stay with you. They've told you more than they should have, yet they've kept their secrets intact, leaving you with only impressions: a falcon's steady gaze, a gazelle's fleeting grace, a crocodile's patient stillness. In this palace, even the beasts know how to play the game. The painted eyes fade behind you as the corridor narrows and the air grows sweeter, carrying the scent of something warm and cloying. You follow it to a vaulted chamber where low tables are crowded with bowls of dates, figs, honey, and roasted nuts. Clay jars of wine rest in shallow basins of cool water, their stoppers sealed with beeswax. This is the palace's sweet store, a place where taste itself could be turned into a tool of influence. Food in ancient Egypt was never just sustenance. It was a medium for ritual, romance, and negotiation. In banquet halls, the choice of dishes and drinks could flatter a guest, signal trust, or even send a warning. Recipes recorded in temple kitchens list special blends, dates mashed with almonds and cinnamon, honey cakes scented with rosewater, fermented drinks infused with herbs said to warm the heart. These weren't merely culinary indulgences. Each had a role in moments that mattered. In some seasons, rare honey from the delta was so precious it was measured out in spoonfuls and kept under lock. An entry from a palace inventory tablet records the delivery of 3 sealed jars to the pharaoh's private quarters on the same night as a visiting dignitary's arrival. No official account says what was served, but the pairing of honey and wine was a combination often reserved for evenings meant to soften conversation. The link between sweetness and allure was understood by everyone at court. Honey was connected to Hathor, goddess of love and joy, and in some rituals, honeyed wine was offered as a symbolic marriage between the sweetness of life and the intoxication of passion. Scholars still discuss whether the practice of sharing a single bowl of spiced wine between 2 people originated as a sacred act or evolved from simpler courtship traditions. One unusual note from a merchant's letter describes a delivery of candied lotus petals, said to have been ordered for the harem. These delicate confections were prepared by soaking fresh petals in honey, drying them in the sun, then dusting them with powdered cinnamon. They were not everyday fare. They were crafted for rare occasions, perhaps as a gift from the pharaoh to a favored consort. Imagine the effect a plate of glistening petals served in a quiet chamber, their scent and taste reinforcing every word and glance exchanged. In the great banquet halls, the role of sweets was just as strategic. Dishes were brought out in carefully timed intervals, with certain flavors appearing when negotiations needed softening or when an honored guest was to be singled out. A tray of pomegranate seeds might be sent only to a specific seat, the crimson jewels gleaming in the light, the message understood without a word. You picture one such banquet, musicians playing the harp and flute, the air fragrant with roasting duck and spiced bread. Servants move between the guests, offering bowls of honeyed almonds to some, date-filled pastries to others. At the head of the hall, the pharaoh dips his fingers into a bowl of figs, choosing one to pass directly to the person beside him. That small act, public yet intimate, would be remembered long after the meal ended. The private chambers had their own flavor rituals. A partner might feed the ruler pieces of fruit dipped in sweet wine, or press a morsel of honeycake to the lips as a playful challenge. These acts blurred the line between hospitality and seduction, between nourishment and promise. The taste lingered long after the moment ended, a reminder bound to both the tongue and the memory. A quirky tidbit from a court servant's record claims that on especially hot nights, iced drinks were prepared by bringing blocks of river ice from deep storage pits and crushing them into sweet syrups. Whether this was true or simply palace myth, the image is striking. Cool, fragrant sweetness on the tongue in the sweltering dark, the kind of luxury that could melt more than just the heat. Leaving the sweet store, you realize how deeply flavor was woven into the rhythms of palace life. To the pharaoh, a jar of honey or a handful of pomegranate seeds could carry as much weight as a decree, and the act of sharing them could be as binding as any treaty. Even the simplest sweetness, in the right setting, could tip the balance of loyalty or affection in ways no one could publicly admit. The scent of honey fades as you step into a cooler, quieter wing of the palace, where carved lintels bear the images of Hathor and Isis. Here lies the royal nursery, a place not only for raising princes and princesses, but also for shaping the bonds that could ripple through the pharaoh's most private decisions later in life. In ancient Egypt, the role of a royal wet nurse carried immense prestige. These women were not simply caretakers. They became part of the ruler's inner world from infancy. Chosen for their health, beauty, and often for connections to influential families, a wet nurse could remain a constant presence in the pharaoh's life long after he left the cradle. Their closeness to the young heir sometimes gave them more sway than high-ranking courtiers. Reliefs and inscriptions in smaller private chapels occasionally depict a nurse alongside the young prince, holding him with an ease no court official would dare. This early, physical bond often forged a trust that endured into adulthood. Scholars still debate how far such influence reached. Could a nurse's advice on matters of the heart, whispered decades later, truly shape the ruler's choices? The consistency of their presence suggests it might. A rare fragment from a personal letter between two palace women hints at an even subtler role. She speaks to him as one who knew him before the gods crowned him. It's easy to imagine the weight of such familiarity, someone who could address the pharaoh not as a divine figure, but as the child she once comforted. One unusual record from the reign of Amenhotep III mentions a wet nurse being gifted an entire estate. The official reason was services rendered in the palace, but the timing coincided with the pharaoh taking a bride from the harem. Perhaps she had smoothed the path between them, offering counsel rooted in a lifetime of understanding his moods and habits. The nursery itself is a warm, sunlit space, with painted walls showing scenes of the Nile teeming with fish and birds. Reed mats cover the floor, and low shelves hold toys carved from ivory hippopotamuses, ducks, and cats with painted eyes. In one corner, a carved wooden cradle sways gently, its linen lining embroidered with protective symbols meant to ward off illness and ill fortune. In this setting, the wet nurse was more than a caretaker, she was a gatekeeper. Anyone seeking the young heir's attention often had to pass through her, and she could decide whether a visitor's mood, gift, or story would reach receptive ears. In later years, the same instinct to protect could easily extend to the pharaoh's private liaisons, subtly shaping who gained access to him in moments away from the council chamber. A quirky tidbit preserved in oral tradition tells of a wet nurse who taught her royal charge a secret whistle so they could find each other in the palace gardens. Decades later, as a grown man, the pharaoh was said to respond instantly to that sound, even during formal gatherings. Imagine the unspoken understanding in that connection, how a single note could pierce through layers of ceremony and pretense. By adulthood, these early attachments could manifest in unexpected ways. A pharaoh might favor women who reminded him of his nurse's kindness, or who shared her mannerisms. In some cases, a nurse's own daughters were placed in the harem, where their presence carried the added advantage of maternal endorsement. These choices blurred the lines between familial loyalty, political maneuvering, and personal desire. As you leave the nursery, the sunlight seems sharper outside, the air drier. The echoes of laughter and lullabies fade, but the realization remains. In a world where every relationship had political weight, the bonds formed in infancy could be among the most enduring and the most quietly powerful. The soft warmth of the nursery falls away as you step into a chamber heavy with the scent of incense and the muted glow of oil lamps. This is the sanctuary of mystical pregnancy rites, where belief, medicine, and magic intertwined to ensure the royal line would endure. In a kingdom where the pharaoh's ability to produce heirs was linked directly to divine favor, these rituals were taken as seriously as treaties or military campaigns. Within Egypt's religious framework, conceiving an heir was not merely a personal matter but a cosmic duty. The birth of a royal child reaffirmed the harmony of Ma'at, the divine order, and reinforced the pharaoh's legitimacy. Temple records describe priests preparing elaborate ceremonies to invoke fertility gods like Min and Hathor, summoning their blessings through chants, offerings, and symbolic acts that could last through the night. Some of these rites took place in specially consecrated birthing houses, small annexes attached to temples. These rooms were decorated with scenes of protective deities driving away chaos, spirits, while the walls were inscribed with spells to open the womb and let life flow like the Nile in flood. A priestess trained in midwifery might anoint the queen or consort with oils steeped in lotus, myrrh, and fenugreek fragrances believed to awaken both body and spirit. Scholars still debate whether these oils held genuine medicinal qualities or served mainly as ritual enhancers for the senses. One intriguing note from a Theban medical papyrus details a charm involving a necklace strung with dates, malachite beads, and tiny gold figures of Bes, the household god known for his protective and mischievous nature. The necklace would be worn at night, its jingling meant to scare away spirits believed to hinder conception. The same papyrus also records the use of honey and ground acacia pods. Modern science now knows the latter contains a natural spermicide, raising questions about whether some fertility mixtures might have been used selectively to control rather than encourage pregnancy. A particularly unusual account from an ostracon found near a workers' village describes a ceremony timed to the exact moment Sirius rose in the pre-dawn sky. The couple seeking divine blessing would stand barefoot in a pool of cool water, holding hands while a priest recited invocations to Sopdet, goddess of the star. The act tied human fertility to the celestial cycle, binding the royal bloodline's future to the heavens. In more private settings, certain rites blended the symbolic with the sensuous. Musicians might play soft harp melodies in a chamber lit only by lamplight, while incense smoke curled upward in slow spirals. Offerings of figs, pomegranates, and sweet wine would be placed within reach, their flavors meant to stimulate the senses alongside the chants. The presence of sacred statues, Min with his raised arm, Hathor with her sistrum, reminded participants that their union was a reenactment of divine creation myths. A whispered piece of palace lore tells of one queen who, after years without a child, was advised by the temple astrologer to conceive only on a night when the moon was in a specific phase and aligned with a certain constellation. The story claims she followed the guidance exactly and bore a son within the year. Whether coincidence or calculated storytelling, the tale endured, becoming part of the royal family's public mythos. Every object in these chambers was chosen with purpose. The mats beneath the couple's feet might be woven with papyrus reeds from the delta, their hollow stems symbolizing channels for life. The oil lamps were often shaped like open flowers, their flames flickering within petals, a quiet visual metaphor for blooming fertility. Even the placement of mirrors, polished discs of bronze, served to reflect light toward the participants, doubling their image as if to promise the arrival of another life. When you step back from these rites, you can see how they operated on multiple levels at once, as acts of devotion, as intimate experiences, and as political theatre, ensuring that the royal womb was seen as under divine watch. Whether the results matched the prayers or not, the performance itself reinforced the idea that the ruler's body was part of Egypt's cosmic machinery. Leaving the chamber, the incense clings to your clothes. The air outside feels less certain now, as though you've walked out of a place where human will and divine design touched for a moment, quietly, deliberately, and with the weight of an empire's future pressing down on every whispered word. The incense of the birthing chamber still lingers faintly as you step into the blinding light of a palace courtyard. Here, the air hums with music and voices, festival preparations once again, but this time the stage is the open heart of the capital. Long banners ripple from poles, and the scent of roasting fowl mingles with fresh-cut flowers. At first glance, it seems like a grand public celebration, but those who know the palace well understand that much of what unfolds here carries private, coded meaning. Public displays in ancient Egypt were often double-layered. To the crowd, the spectacle affirmed the pharaoh's divine authority, generosity, and strength. But to members of the court, certain gestures, symbols, and placements within the procession could signal personal messages, an unspoken language only a select few could read. Reliefs from Karnak show processions in which the ruler and queen ride together in a chariot, the queen holding a bouquet of lotus and papyrus. To the average onlooker, it's a sign of unity. To those in the know, the combination of flowers is a direct allusion to the union of Upper and Lower Egypt and, by extension, to the harmony of male and female principles. Whether the couple had harmony in private was another matter entirely. A surviving inscription from a temple facade notes that during the festival of Opet, when the sacred bark of Amun was carried from Karnak to Luxor, the pharaoh sometimes placed favored companions in prime viewing spots. From the street, it looked like an honor for loyal subjects. From the palace's point of view, it was an unmistakable signal that someone had the ruler's attention, potentially stirring rivalries behind closed doors. One curious account preserved in a minor scribe's notes describes a moment when the ruler, mid-procession, tossed a garland into the crowd. It landed not randomly, but directly at the feet of a specific noblewoman. Her family's fortunes reportedly improved almost overnight. Whether the gesture was planned or a whim, its implications rippled through the court for months. The sounds of these events were as much a part of the message as the visuals. Trumpets and drums could swell at certain moments, not only to rouse the crowd, but also to punctuate key symbolic actions. A change in rhythm when the pharaoh passed the temple gates, for example, might emphasize a blessing or a warning to those aware of the layers of meaning. The clothing worn at such events also told its own story. While most royal regalia followed tradition, small details could shift to send subtle cues. A different crown than expected, a sash in a color tied to a certain deity, or a piece of jewelry known to be linked to a private relationship. Scholars still discuss whether such sartorial choices were intentional signals to specific individuals or simply personal preference. Given the calculated nature of most royal appearances, few believe they were accidental. From your place in the imagined crowd, you see the pharaoh pass on a golden litter, the sunlight flaring off the gilded panels. His gaze sweeps over the throngs, but then, just briefly, it stops long enough for one person in the crowd to feel the weight of it. You can almost hear the whispers starting before the litter is even out of sight. And yet, these public acts were not without risk. Favor displayed too openly could ignite jealousy, embolden rivals, or draw unwanted attention to private relationships the ruler preferred to keep discreet. Navigating this balance was part of the ruler's skill, knowing when to use the spectacle to strengthen a connection and when to keep it buried beneath layers of ceremony. A quirky tradition mentioned in passing by a Greek traveler centuries later claims that during certain festivals, the pharaoh's chosen companion for the evening was decided by a small, symbolic act in public, a shared cup of wine, a clasped hand during the final hymn, or even the granting of a particular role in a dance. Whether or not the custom was genuine, it captures the essence of these occasions. Public celebration as a carefully staged theatre for private meaning. By the time the sun begins to set, the banners have faded into shadow, and the crowd drifts away, carrying stories that will be told and retold, each version colored by the teller's imagination. For most, the festival was a day of joy and spectacle. For a few, it was a message delivered in plain sight, wrapped in music, color, and ritual understood fully only by those it was meant to reach. The echoes of festival drums fade into a quieter corner of the palace, where the air feels cooler and the corridors narrower. You turn into a small, dimly lit antechamber and notice a tapestry hanging against the wall. Its woven scene shows two nearly identical men standing before a god, their faces and postures so alike you have to look twice. This is the realm of the pharaoh's double, a practice that slips between political safeguard and private intrigue. In Egypt's long history, the idea of a royal double or look-alike has surfaced in both legend and fragmentary record. Officially, such a person might serve as a decoy during dangerous public appearances, ensuring that an assassin's blow or a rival's magic struck the wrong target. But whispers in the palace suggest other uses, ones that step far away from the battlefield and into the candlelit chambers of personal life. Some temple reliefs, worn by time but still legible, depict two figures dressed identically in royal regalia, one standing slightly behind the other. The scene could be symbolic of divine protection, or it could hint at an arrangement in which the double appeared in the pharaoh's stead during politically sensitive meetings, or, more daringly, in intimate situations where the ruler's presence carried too much risk. Scholars remain divided on whether this was theatrical rumor or cautious statecraft. A curious note from a minor court scribe, buried in the margins of an account scroll, mentions a shadow of the king taking part in a nighttime ceremony attended by a foreign delegation. The implication is that the true pharaoh remained unseen, perhaps to avoid potential scandal if the gathering strayed into territory best left unrecorded. Whether the scribe was speculating or reporting fact, the phrasing suggests the court was comfortable with the idea of a stand-in moving fluidly between the political and the personal. The logistics of maintaining such a double required quiet precision. A man chosen for the role had to share not only the ruler's height and build but also his mannerisms, voice, and even the faint tilt of his head when listening. These details could be studied and practiced under the guidance of palace tutors. In public, the resemblance needed to be flawless. In private, the double might use his similarity to smooth situations that would be awkward or dangerous for the pharaoh to navigate personally. One piece of oral tradition speaks of a festival night when a king was seen walking in the gardens with a woman known to be politically inconvenient. The next day, the real ruler appeared at court without any hint of scandal, and the story faded as quickly as it had surfaced. The double's role, in that telling, was not deception for its own sake but the preservation of appearances. Yet the existence of such a role would have its own risks. A double who spent enough time in the ruler's company might grow accustomed to the privileges of proximity. What started as an act of service could, in rare cases, slide into quiet rivalry or subtle leverage. Imagine a man who could wear the ruler's face, how tempting it might be to test where that power could lead. In quieter uses, a double could attend a feast or religious ritual on the ruler's behalf, freeing the pharaoh to spend the evening elsewhere entirely. Those elsewhere moments could range from political strategy sessions to deeply personal encounters kept far from public knowledge. The double's presence in the public eye acted as a screen, a way to be in two places at once without breaking the illusion of constant royal visibility. One unusual account in a damaged papyrus from the late period describes a scene where the two kings performed a symbolic act together, lighting twin lamps in a temple to honor Horus. Whether this was metaphor, artistic license, or evidence of a real ceremonial practice involving a stand-in, the image of mirrored authority is striking. You leave the antechamber with the unsettling thought that in this palace, not every set of eyes you meet belongs to who you think. The corridors twist back toward the main hall, and for a moment you glimpse a figure a head height, posture, and stride identical to the ruler's Hamprind. He disappears around a corner before you can be sure. Perhaps it was the king himself, or perhaps not. The thought of the pharaoh's double lingers as you enter a quieter passage, this one lined with shelves holding clay jars and bundles of papyrus scrolls. The smell here is faintly sweet beeswax, old reed paper, and the ghost of dried ink. You have stepped into the palace archives, but this is not the orderly treasury of laws or decrees. This section houses something more intimate, the letters of longing. Throughout Egypt's dynasties, rulers exchanged personal notes with queens, consorts, and sometimes individuals far beyond the palace walls. While much of this correspondence was lost to time or destroyed to protect reputations, fragments survive in ostraca, on bits of leather, or even on the backs of tax records, where a scribe clearly decided a scrap of bureaucratic waste was the perfect surface for something far more private. Some of these letters read like straightforward invitations, brief, formal, and couched in polite language. Others brim with coded imagery. A simple phrase about the lotus blooming could carry layers of meaning, hinting at beauty, desire, or a shared memory from a private garden. In a culture that prized symbolism, such metaphors allowed the writer to say everything without saying it outright. One fragment, attributed by handwriting style to the reign of Ramesses II, speaks of the moon crossing the reeds and the warmth of honey on the tongue. Whether these were genuine poetic flourishes or deliberate allusions to specific encounters, the imagery still carries a certain heat across millennia. The channels through which these letters traveled were as intriguing as the words themselves. Trusted messengers, often eunuchs or older servants bound by loyalty, would deliver them sealed in beeswax, sometimes with a sprig of papyrus or a tiny carved charm attached. The delivery itself was part of the message. A letter arriving with lotus petals might signal an invitation for that same evening, while one wrapped in linen scented with incense could be meant for slower, more deliberate contemplation. One unusual tale from palace gossip describes a consort who learned to fold her replies into the shape of a fish. The pharaoh, fond of fishing, reportedly kept every one of these folded notes in a lacquered box. Scholars still discuss whether the practice was personal whimsy or a deliberate ploy to bind affection with a shared symbol. These letters were not always private between two people. In some cases, a well-placed courtier might accidentally glimpse the contents, spreading select phrases into the ears of rivals or allies. The smallest turn of phrase could spark speculation, and speculation was a powerful currency. In moments of political strain, correspondence could serve as both comfort and strategy. A message filled with affection might also carry a subtle reminder of loyalty or a request for influence in a council decision. The pharaoh's pen could caress and command in the same sentence. You pick up a brittle scrap from the shelf. Its ink faded but still legible. Come to the garden when the shadows are long, and bring the wine from the western storeroom. Simple words, yet you can almost hear the softness in them, the promise of privacy beneath the palm trees, away from the watchful eyes of the court. Some letters never reached their intended readers. A few in the archives bear seals that were never broken, their wax stamped with the ruler's personal mark. Did the messenger falter? Did the sender change their mind? Or were they intercepted and hidden away by someone with their own designs? The fact that they survive at all suggests layers of secrecy still waiting to be unraveled. As you leave the archive, the scent of beeswax follows you. You realize that in a palace built on stone, gold, and ceremony, it might be the fragile, intimate words on scrap paper that hold the truest record of the heart. And in the quiet, you wonder how many stories remain locked in jars and scrolls, waiting for someone bold enough or foolish enough to read them aloud. The scent of beeswax and papyrus fades as you enter a smaller, almost shrine-like chamber, its walls hung with strands of beads and amulets glinting softly in the lamplight. This is the treasury of protective charms, objects worn against the skin, close enough that their touch and weight become part of the body itself. Here, magic and sensuality meet in quiet, deliberate ways. In Egyptian belief, amulets were more than superstition. They were conduits for divine power. Worn around the neck, at the waist, or even braided into hair, each shape carried its own set of meanings. A scarab might protect the heart and guide it safely through the afterlife. The eye of Horus could ward off envy or illness. And some amulets, shaped like lotus buds, fertility symbols or entwined animals, were thought to heighten attraction, weaving protective power with the promise of pleasure. One temple inventory from the reign of Thutmose III lists a series of gold and electrum charms gifted to the royal household. The description notes that several were to be worn in the chamber of the two thrones, a phrase scholars interpret as referring to the ruler's private quarters. Whether these objects were used strictly for warding off harm or also as talismans in moments of intimacy remains an open question. An unusual find from a tomb in the western Thebes necropolis includes a pair of hollow amulets shaped like tiny jars. Residue inside suggests they once held scented oil combining fragrance, touch, and magical symbolism in a single ornament. Imagine a consort clasping one around her neck, the heat of her skin slowly releasing its perfume while she moved through the torchlit corridors. Some amulets were designed with deliberate secrecy in mind. Flat discs of polished hematite could be engraved on one side with sacred images, and on the reverse with words meant for the wearer's eyes only. A lover might run a thumb over the hidden inscription, feeling the grooves without revealing them to anyone else. In a palace where every glance and gift could be scrutinized, such hidden messages offered a rare privacy. Scholars still debate whether the most intimate amulets were gifts from the ruler or tokens exchanged between lovers without official sanction. The materials used gold, semi-precious stones, or faience often reveal the giver's status but not the full story. In some cases, even humble clay charms carried immense personal value if they had been worn during a significant moment. The act of fastening an amulet could itself be a ritual. Certain protective knots, tied while reciting specific phrases, were thought to bind not just the object but the intent of the giver to the body of the receiver. This made the moment of gifting charged with both spiritual and emotional weight. A quirky bit of folklore tells of an amulet shaped like a cat, presented to a queen who adored felines. It was said that she never removed it, even during bathing, and that the ruler himself would stroke the charm during conversation, as if it were a private signal between them. Whether the story is true or embroidered over time, it captures the blend of protection, affection, and sensuality these objects could embody. The placement of these charms on the body was as telling as their form. An anklet with small dangling amulets might be meant to jingle softly when the wearer walked into a room, drawing attention before a word was spoken. A waistcord hidden beneath linen could carry symbols meant to warm the womb and sweeten the heart, as one papyrus phrased it, merging erotic intent with divine blessing. As you leave the chamber, the faint clink of the bead strands follows you, a sound like whispered secrets brushing past your ear. You can't help but think of how these small, beautiful objects lived their lives in the most private spaces, resting against skin, warmed by breath and heartbeat while carrying messages of devotion, desire, and protection that might never be spoken aloud. The delicate chime of beads fades as you step into a sunlit hall where the walls blaze with images of a lioness-headed goddess. Her golden eyes glare from every surface, her mane flowing into painted flames. This is the domain of Sekhmet, goddess of war, plague, and, paradoxically, irresistible allure. In the royal imagination, a queen likened to Sekhmet was a figure to be both desired and feared. Depictions of royal women as Sekhmet appear throughout temple reliefs and statuary. Officially, the imagery framed the queen as the pharaoh's fierce protector, the one who could strike down enemies with divine wrath. Yet there was another layer. Sekhmet's dangerous beauty and unpredictable temper made her an archetype of intoxicating attraction. In a culture where symbols carried multiple meanings, presenting a queen in this form was as much a declaration of her magnetism as her power. One limestone stela from the reign of Amenhotep III shows the queen seated beside the pharaoh during a festival, wearing a crown of solar discs and uraeus cobras, emblems of Sekhmet. Her gaze, carved with unusual intensity, meets the viewers directly. Scholars still discuss whether such portraits were purely political or hinted at a personal dynamic in which the queen's charisma was as influential in the bedchamber as it was in the council hall. An unusual court anecdote, preserved in a scribe's private notebook, tells of a feast where the queen, dressed in gold-threaded linen, performed a ritual dance to honor Sekhmet. The performance reportedly silenced the entire hall, not because of fear, but because her movements blurred the line between ritual devotion and a display of captivating grace. The scribe noted that even the visiting envoys, usually reserved, forgot their wine until the music stopped. The association with Sekhmet also carried strategic advantages. A queen known for a lioness temper could wield that reputation to deflect unwanted alliances or intimidate rivals in the harem. At the same time, she could soften that image when it served her, becoming the calm healer, another aspect of Sekhmet's complex identity. Gifts, linked to the goddess, reinforced this image. A necklace bearing tiny gold lions might be given as a token of favor, the metal warm against the skin. The gesture said as much about possession as about protection. Some queens reportedly wore amulets shaped like Sekhmet's head during festivals, claiming the goddess's strength as their own in moments when attention was most intense. A quirky legend from palace gossip tells of a night when the queen's chambers were filled with lion-shaped oil lamps. The flickering shadows cast their shapes onto the walls, so that anyone entering would see the room prowling with moving silhouettes. Whether it was a private amusement or a symbolic declaration, The image stuck in the minds of those who heard about it, an unforgettable blend of beauty and intimidation. Sekhmet's dual nature, bringer of both plague and healing, mirrored the balance a royal woman had to maintain. Too much ferocity could alienate allies. Too much softness could invite exploitation. The most skillful queens embodied both, shifting between warmth and danger as the situation required. In private, the comparison to Sekhmet could take on a more playful tone. Some stories suggest that consorts likened to the goddess would adopt small tokens of her imagery: lion paw slippers, gold-threaded belts with feline motifs, as subtle reminders of their chosen role. For the pharaoh, these details might serve as both a challenge and an invitation, a reminder that attraction to such a figure came with the thrill of risk. Leaving the hall, you pass between two massive statues of Sekhmet. Their black granite forms cold under your fingertips. The sunlight catches in their carved eyes, giving them a momentary glint of life. You can almost hear the low growl of a predator at rest, watching, waiting, deciding whether to bare its teeth or simply let you pass. The silent granite lionesses fade behind you as you step into an open courtyard where the clatter of wood and the grunt of exertion fill the air. Here, the polished flagstones are scuffed from sparring matches, and racks of spears, bows, and shields line the walls. This is where the pharaoh's court holds its contests, a place where the language of attraction is spoken not with flowers or poetry, but with strength and skill. Physical prowess in ancient Egypt was as much a currency as gold. Reliefs from temples and palaces depict the ruler hunting lions, wrestling opponents, or drawing massive bows, feats designed to inspire awe. But behind the official imagery, these displays also played a subtler role. A well-fought bout or a decisive victory in the games could stir admiration in ways that had nothing to do with state politics. One fragment from a festival record describes the Day of the Strong Arm, an event where nobles, guards, and sometimes even foreign guests competed in archery, wrestling, and mock chariot races. The pharaoh's participation was inevitable, but so too were the sidelong glances from the harem balconies above. To watch a ruler dominate the field was to be reminded of his vitality, a quality prized as much in the bedchamber as on the battlefield. An unusual account in a private guard's memoir tells of a match where the pharaoh, instead of striking down his opponent at once, drew the contest out, letting the crowd and certain onlookers enjoy the spectacle of his stamina and control. The guard noted that a particular consort was present that day, her eyes following his every movement until the last fall. Scholars still debate whether such prolonged displays were calculated for political drama or for personal effect. These contests were not always deadly serious. Some were framed as playful challenges, meant to encourage flirtation under the guise of competition. A noblewoman might toss a ring for the pharaoh to catch on his spear, or present him with a laurel of woven reeds if he struck a target from a great distance. These exchanges, though public, carried undertones of personal recognition. The games also allowed subtle messages to be sent. A contestant who was favored might receive a weapon engraved with symbols of protection or victory, marking them as under the pharaoh's personal regard. Conversely, an adversary might be handed a dull blade or a bow with an uneven string, a gesture that could humiliate without a word being spoken. One quirky detail from a courtier's diary mentions a wrestling match where the sand was scented with crushed herbs, so that each fall was met with a burst of sweet air. The description is strange and oddly intimate, suggesting that even the dust of competition could be infused with sensory layers meant to please or entice. The environment of the courtyard was part of the performance. Bronze gongs rang at the start of each round, while musicians played short, sharp rhythms to match the movements on the field. The sun cast deep shadows, highlighting the tension in muscles and the gleam of sweat. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the raw energy of movement, challenge, and the unspoken awareness of who was watching. When the contests ended, the victors would often share a ceremonial drink wine mixed with herbs said to restore the heart. For the ruler, this was an opportunity to reward loyalty with both public praise and private invitations. A clasp of the hand could linger, A word of thanks could be pitched just low enough for only one person to hear. As you leave the courtyard, the smell of sweat and herbs clings to you, a reminder that in this palace, even the clash of weapons could be part of the game. Strength, here, is not just for the defense of the realm, it is another form of courtship, one measured in the arc of an arrow, the grip of a hand, and the approving murmur from a balcony high above. The heat of the training yard lingers on your skin as you follow a shaded arcade toward the scent of fermenting fruit. The sound of low laughter and the clink of ceramic cups leads you into a colonnaded garden where the evening air is heavy with the smell of palm wine. Here, the mood is looser, the pace slower. The sharp edges of formality soften in the glow of oil lamps, and the air hums with voices unguarded by daylight protocol. In Egypt, wine made from dates or fermented palm sap was more than a drink. It was a social instrument. Feasts and intimate gatherings alike relied on its power to loosen tongues and dissolve the rigid barriers of court etiquette. Reliefs from banquet scenes show servants pouring cups, while guests recline on low couches, garlands slipping down their shoulders, laughter breaking the solemn mask expected during the day. A document from a palace steward's records lists the preparations for one such gathering. Jars of palm wine, sweetened with figs, trays of roasted duck and honey bread, bowls of pomegranate seeds. Alongside these provisions is an intriguing note: lotus to steep. Steeped lotus petals were known for their mild narcotic effect, creating a relaxed, dreamlike state. Whether for religious devotion or private indulgence, their inclusion changed the tone of the night. One unusual anecdote from the reign of Akhenaten tells of a gathering in which the pharaoh, after 3 rounds of wine, personally filled the cups of certain favored guests. The gesture was both honor and invitation. The same account notes that musicians shifted to slower rhythms as the night deepened, the pluck of the harp replaced by the low hum of flutes. Scholars still wonder whether these musical transitions were spontaneous or part of a deliberate progression toward intimacy. The garden setting itself played its role. Pools reflected lamplight in rippling gold, their surfaces scattered with floating lotus blooms. The scent of blooming night jasmine drifted through the air, mingling with the earthy sweetness of the wine. Cushions were arranged in small clusters, encouraging quiet conversations rather than open debate. A quirky detail from a court gossip tablet claims that certain wine jars were painted with symbols hinting at their intended audience: a falcon for the ruler, a papyrus stalk for a scribe, a fish for a particular courtier known for his wit. This quiet code allowed servers to steer the flow of drink toward those whose company was most desired, ensuring that certain tables grew louder, warmer, more receptive as the night wore on. By the 3rd or 4th cup, the barriers between rank and role began to blur. A visiting dignitary might find himself telling a childhood story to a queen's handmaiden. A military commander might share a joke with a scribe he'd only ever seen across the council chamber. For the pharaoh, this mellowed state could be the perfect backdrop to gauge loyalty, kindle attraction, or nudge a hesitant ally toward agreement. Not every such evening was purely celebratory. Some served as quiet stages for testing boundaries. A whispered compliment, a shared sip from the same cup, the brush of fingers when passing a dish, each was a move in the ongoing dance of court intrigue. If the palm wine whispered courage into someone's heart, they might take a step they would never risk in the bright light of day. As the night deepened, the music slowed almost to a murmur, the lamps guttering low. The conversations thinned into clusters of 2 or 3, the air thick with the scent of spilt wine and jasmine. Somewhere in the darkness, a laugh rose a little too intimate, a little too knowing before being swallowed again by the warm, heavy quiet. When you finally step away, the night air outside feels startlingly cool. The stars bright above the dark silhouette of the palace. The faint taste of sweetness lingers in your mouth, along with the knowledge that in this garden, wine was never just a drink, it was a key, and many doors were waiting to be opened. The scent of jasmine and wine trails after you as you enter a vaulted chamber lined with shelves of linen-wrapped forms. This is the royal embalming hall, quiet as a temple, yet holding its own strange intimacy. Here, the art of preserving the dead was as much about ritual secrecy as it was about honoring the body. Some wrappings, if you know where to look, tell stories hidden from the official records. Mummification was a sacred duty, meant to prepare the deceased for eternity. But in the case of a pharaoh or favored consort, the process could also encode messages. Skilled embalmers, sworn to silence, sometimes wove small amulets or embroidered symbols into the inner layers of linen. Officially, these were protective charms for the afterlife. Privately, they could serve as personal tokens from lovers or allies kept so close to the body that no outsider would ever see them again. Archaeologists have noted faint traces of perfume or resin in certain wrappings that were not standard for the period. These rare scents, like imported frankincense or blue lotus oil, suggest deliberate choices made for someone's memory rather than for general preservation. One embalmer's tablet from the late New Kingdom records, "Oil gifted from the lady of the house for the Lord's skin," implying a deeply personal offering rather than a temple-issued provision. A fragmentary story from palace gossip hints at a queen who, knowing her consort's health was failing, commissioned a length of linen embroidered with a lotus in full bloom. It was folded into the final layers around his torso, hidden forever from public view, whether meant as a symbol of love or a claim on him in the afterlife. Its presence became part of the body's eternal record. Scholars still debate whether some wrappings were intentionally inscribed with coded patterns or knots that could be read by those who knew their meaning. Certain repeated twists in the binding might signal loyalty, forgiveness, or even unfulfilled desire. Without written explanation, these choices remain locked mysteries, visible only to those who prepared the body. The hall itself feels like a place between worlds. Clay lamps cast long shadows over stone benches, and the air is thick with resinous smoke. On one table lies a small bronze bowl filled with melted myrrh, its surface glinting in the firelight. The scent is warm, almost sweet, but under it lingers the sharper tang of natron salts drying the body. A quirky detail recorded in an embalmer's guild manual describes the use of colored threads, red for vitality, green for renewal, woven into the innermost layers. In some cases, these colors matched the personal regalia of the deceased, or the hues of gifts exchanged during life. You can imagine the quiet care with which a lover's chosen shade might be placed against the skin, knowing it would rest there forever. There's a hush to the work here that goes beyond reverence. Every gesture, pouring oil, smoothing linen, tucking an amulet, is deliberate. Even in death, the pharaoh's body is treated as a vessel not only for the soul, but for the memories, loyalties, and passions that shaped his reign. When you step back toward the entrance, you catch a final glimpse of the shelves lined with finished forms, their faces covered by painted masks. They look serene, but the layers beneath hide messages no historian can fully decipher. It strikes you that in this palace, secrecy does not end with death. It is simply wrapped tighter, bound in linen, and carried into eternity. The resin-scented stillness of the embalming hall fades as you step into the brightness of the palace's outer gardens. Here, palm fronds sway in the warm breeze, and the air smells faintly of water lilies from the reflecting pools. Beyond the trimmed hedges, a narrow stone path winds toward a gate. Few are permitted to pass an entrance to the pharaoh's desert retreat. These hideaways, far from the eyes of the city, were more than hunting lodges. They were sanctuaries for privacy, escape, and meetings that could never take place in the public wings of the palace. Egyptian rulers often maintained such retreats in the desert's edge or deep within lush gardens. Officially, they served as hunting grounds for lions, antelope, or exotic birds brought in for sport. Reliefs carved in limestone show the pharaoh loosing arrows from a chariot or bringing down game with a throw stick. Yet alongside the hunting scenes, subtler carvings reveal vine-covered pavilions, shaded pools, and beds laid with embroidered linens, images that hint at a second, quieter purpose for these places. A record from a royal steward during the reign of Seti describes preparations for a 3-day private sojourn at one such lodge. Among the supplies listed are jars of wine, baskets of figs, perfumed oil, and musicians' instruments, none of which were necessary for hunting. The implication is clear. The desert lodges could transform into stages for secluded feasts and personal liaisons. One unusual tale, preserved in a servant's family stories, tells of a night when the pharaoh and a visiting noblewoman escaped the noise of a festival to ride out under the stars. They returned only at dawn, their horses lathered, the noblewoman's hair scented with cedarwood smoke from a fire built far from the lodge. Whether the account is romanticized or true, it captures the essence of these retreats, moments suspended outside the relentless gaze of court life. The lodges themselves were architectural curiosities. Built of sandstone and cooled by channels of running water, they featured roofed terraces open to the desert wind. Inside, the rooms were small but luxurious. Walls painted with scenes of the Nile's abundance, cushions piled high on cedar benches, and bronze basins for washing away the day's heat. Windows were often set high to keep the interior shaded, leaving the space dim and cool, a sharp contrast to the blazing sun outside. Scholars still debate how often these retreats were used for political strategy versus personal pleasure. Some argue that important negotiations, especially those requiring absolute secrecy, took place here under the pretext of hunting trips. Others see them as backdrops for affairs that could not withstand the scrutiny of the palace's corridors. A quirky entry in a hunting log notes the release of trained ibex into a walled garden at one lodge. Ostensibly, it was to give the ruler's guests the thrill of the chase without leaving the shaded grounds. But one wonders if the real thrill lay in the privacy those high walls ensured. In the evenings, the lodges came alive in their own way. Torches would be set in sconces along the outer walls, and the scent of roasting meat would drift across the desert air. Musicians might play reed flutes while the pharaoh and a select few guests reclined on rugs beneath the open sky, the constellations sharp above them. Conversations could wander freely here, unconstrained by protocol, an ideal setting for whispered promises or delicate bargains. As you step through the gate and look back toward the distant palace, you realize that these hideaways were more than escapes from duty. They were spaces where the pharaoh could rewrite the rules, where the boundaries between ruler and mortal blurred, and where alliances of the heart or the state could be sealed in the stillness of the desert night. The scent of desert wind still clings to you as you step back into the palace through a narrow side entrance. The air here feels different, cooler, tinged with ink and the faint mustiness of papyrus. This is the scribe's quarter, a warren of small chambers where the rustle of reed pens never stops. In one corner sits a room with its door slightly ajar, the faint glow of a single oil lamp spilling into the hallway. Inside, a figure bends over a scroll, one of the royal scribes, whose proximity to the pharaoh often brought privileges extending far beyond ink and parchment. In the ancient Egyptian court, literacy was an extraordinary power. Scribes recorded decrees, tracked tribute, and copied sacred texts, but some also served as the pharaoh's private correspondents. To compose a love poem or draft a personal letter was to hold the ruler's thoughts in your hands, shaping their tone and even their implications. A single well-placed phrase could shift an alliance, soothe an insult, or stir affection. Reliefs from Theban tombs depict scribes sitting cross-legged with palettes in hand, a roll of papyrus unspooled across their knees. These are the public images, dignified and precise. In private, the work could be more delicate. A scribe trusted to record a ruler's intimate words might be granted access to chambers where few others could go, witnessing moments of candor or vulnerability hidden from the rest of the court. One fragment of an unrolled papyrus contains a poem written in a hand, identified as belonging to a court scribe under Horemheb. It speaks of the garden at dusk, where the lilies close, and the warmth of wine on the lips we share. Whether the scribe composed it himself or simply wrote the ruler's dictation is unknown, but the care in the lettering suggests an intimacy in the act of writing, regardless of authorship. An unusual tale from oral tradition tells of a scribe who, after years of faithfully drafting royal messages, was summoned to help interpret a dream for the pharaoh. The discussion stretched into the night, and from that day forward, he was seen more often in the ruler's private company at feasts, in garden walks, even aboard river voyages. Some whispered that his skill with words had opened more than just the pharaoh's political confidence. Scholars still discuss whether scribes ever used their role to subtly influence the ruler's affections or decisions. A letter phrased just so, a story chosen for a night's reading, or a quotation from a love poem inserted between official lines, all could serve as quiet nudges towards certain people or outcomes. The tools of their trade became part of this intimacy. Reed pens, once dipped in ink, would grow softer and more pliable with use. A well-used pen kept for personal letters might be stored apart from the official set, its wearer a silent record of private exchanges. Ink recipes could also vary, some batches scented faintly with myrrh or cinnamon oil, a sensory detail that tied the act of reading to a specific memory. A quirky note in a scribal inventory mentions a palette with compartments labeled not for colors, but for moods, joy, seriousness, affection, regret. Whether this was practical humor or genuine practice is unclear, but it reveals an awareness of how much emotion these men channeled through their hands. As you leave the scribe's quarter, you can almost hear the faint scratching of pens continuing in the distance. It's a sound that carries both power and subtlety, a reminder that in the palace, influence could be won not only by beauty or strength, but by the quiet stroke of ink on papyrus, and by the person trusted to write the words others would never hear aloud. The scent of papyrus ink fades as you walk through a quieter corridor, its walls painted with bright festival scenes. At first, they seem ordinary musicians, dancers, and revelers, but then you notice figures wearing masks, their faces hidden beneath gilded animal heads and stylized human visages. This is the entrance to the masquerade hall, where the pharaoh and his inner circle could step outside the rigid boundaries of identity and explore a more fluid realm of desire and intrigue. Masquerades in ancient Egypt were rare and highly controlled affairs, often tied to festivals honoring deities associated with transformation like Hathor, goddess of love, or Bes, the mischievous household protector. Officially, these masked gatherings were symbolic reenactments of myths in which gods took on disguises to test mortals or each other. Privately, they provided a sanctioned space for rulers and courtiers to act without the weight of recognition. A wall inscription from a lesser-known temple at Esna describes a night of hidden faces in which guests exchanged not only masks, but roles, nobles, dressed as servants, warriors as dancers, and high priestesses as playful attendants. The text hints that even the pharaoh participated, wearing a jackal mask to honor Anubis. Whether these reversals were purely theatrical or carried into more intimate games after the public portion ended is left unsaid. One unusual story recorded in a palace servant's oral history tells of a masquerade where the pharaoh, disguised as a humble musician, wandered among the guests offering cups of wine. Those who took them without realizing his identity were later summoned privately, some for rewards, others perhaps for more personal reasons. The thrill of uncertainty made the night both dangerous and irresistible. The masks themselves were crafted works of art, painted cartonnage or hammered bronze, inlaid with colored glass. Some depicted gods with serene expressions, others took on exaggerated human features, smiling or frowning in ways that made them strangely more alive than the faces beneath. Scholars still debate whether certain masks were known to belong to specific individuals, turning anonymity into a form of coded recognition between insiders. The hall during such an event would be a blur of color and movement. Oil lamps reflected off polished floors, and the air was thick with incense and the sound of sistrums, flutes, and hand drums. Couples drifted between the columns, their whispered words masked by the music. A brush of a sleeve or a touch of fingers could happen without the fear of scandal after all. Who could say who had made the gesture? In some accounts, the masquerades ended with a ceremonial unmasking, but only for those chosen by the pharaoh. This final moment could reveal alliances or affections to the whole gathering, turning private interactions into public statements. More often, however, the true stories of these nights were carried away only in the memories of those who had walked the hall, still wondering who had smiled at them from behind painted eyes. A quirky detail from a cache of discarded masks found near a palace storeroom shows that some were inscribed on the inside with short phrases, "Beloved of Hathor," "For the night only," or "Remember the lotus." These private messages would be invisible to everyone except the wearer, adding another layer of intimacy to the game. As you leave the masquerade hall, the painted revelers on the walls seem to watch you more closely. The idea lingers that in this space, faces were both concealed and revealed, truths were twisted into play, and the pharaoh could, for a few hours, explore desires beyond the throne's constraints without ever breaking the rules, because here, the rules were made to be unrecognizable. The laughter and music of the masquerade hall fade into a narrower passage, where the air grows cooler and faintly damp. You emerge into a small courtyard, dominated by a shallow pool. Lotus flowers float on its still surface, their pale blue petals just beginning to curl inward as evening approaches. The fragrance is unmistakable, sweet, heady, and faintly narcotic. This is not merely a garden, it is the pharaoh's lotus court, a place where beauty and symbolism merge into a language of intimacy. In Egyptian culture, the lotus was more than an ornament. It symbolized rebirth, purity, and the promise of the sun's return, but it also carried unmistakable sensual associations. Scenes in tombs and temples often depict lovers exchanging lotus blooms, holding them beneath their noses in a gesture that conveyed both admiration and desire. The flowers' daily cycle, closing at night and reopening with the dawn, mirrored the rhythms of renewal that were as relevant to passion as to the cosmos. Texts from the New Kingdom include love poems comparing a beloved's beauty to the lotus, their scent to intoxication. One surviving fragment reads, "She is the lotus, opening at my approach. Her fragrance is my breath." Whether these lines were composed for public recitation or whispered in private, the imagery is the same, deliberately vivid, designed to stir the senses. An unusual discovery from an Amarna period storeroom revealed shallow bronze bowls shaped like open lotuses, still faintly stained with blue pigment. Scholars believe these were used to serve wine infused with crushed lotus petals, a drink known for its relaxing and mildly euphoric effects. Imagine such a cup passed between two people in this courtyard, the flower's image mirrored in the wine itself. The court's layout encourages seclusion. Arched colonnades enclose the pool, each corner screened by hanging reeds that rustle softly in the breeze. The sound of water trickling from a carved spout masks quiet conversation. Cushioned benches sit just within the shadows, allowing for both comfort and concealment. In the warm glow of oil lamps, the petals on the water seem to float in darkness, their pale shapes drawing the eye toward the center. A quirky tale, preserved in local folklore, tells of a night when the pharaoh challenged a guest to pluck a lotus from the pool without breaking its stem. The task required leaning far over the water, balancing on smooth stone. When the guest succeeded, the ruler took the flower and, instead of keeping it, tucked it behind the guest's ear, a gesture that caused murmurs for weeks afterward. Scholars still discuss whether the lotus's role in such spaces was purely symbolic or deliberately physical. Its scent, lingering on skin and clothing, could serve as a lingering reminder of an encounter, as though the flower itself was carrying the memory forward. In a court where perfumes were carefully chosen for effect, the lotus's natural fragrance needed no enhancement. As the last light of the day fades, the pool reflects both the darkening sky and the flicker of the lamps. The air grows cooler, but the scent remains, curling into every breath. You imagine a quiet meeting here, two figures seated close, speaking softly while their hands rest just beyond touching, the shared presence of the flower binding the moment in silence. When you step back into the passageway, the fragrance follows you, faint but persistent, clinging as though it means to keep you in that space a little longer. In the palace, some symbols fade when the ritual ends. The lotus is not one of them, it blooms again, in memory if not in sight. The cool, fragrant air of the lotus court lingers as you descend a shadowed stair toward the palace's lower terraces. Here, the mood changes brighter colors, foreign fabrics draped over railings, and the low murmur of voices speaking in accents not native to the Nile. This is the quarter where foreign captives, chosen for their beauty or skills, sometimes found themselves elevated from prisoners of war to favored members of the royal household. Egyptian records describe the practice with calculated diplomacy. Captives, brought to serve in the palace, were often young men and women from conquered territories, Nubia, Canaan, Syria, who had caught the eye of royal officials, or even the pharaoh himself. Officially, their presence was framed as tribute, a sign of Egypt's power and generosity. Unofficially, it opened the door to a world where attraction could bloom from unexpected encounters. Reliefs in Theban tombs show foreign attendants carrying trays of delicacies or fanning the ruler during feasts. Their distinctive hairstyles, jewelry, and clothing mark them out as exotic, a living reminder of Egypt's reach beyond its borders. That difference could be turned into a lure. In a court used to the familiar rhythms of Egyptian life, the sight of someone moving with a different grace, speaking in a different cadence, might draw curiosity that could grow into desire. One unusual account in a scribe's private journal tells of a Syrian captive whose voice was so admired that she was trained as a singer for temple ceremonies. Within a year, she was performing in the royal chambers, her songs blending the scales of her homeland with Egyptian harp melodies. The journal hints carefully that the pharaoh began requesting her presence outside of formal performances for the peace her voice brought to the night. Some captives used their new positions to secure influence, learning the customs and language of the court quickly. Others remained symbols, beautiful, silent figures whose presence alone stirred speculation. Scholars still debate how much agency such individuals truly had. The line between honored guest and ornamental possession could shift with a single decision from the throne. The setting of their quarters was no accident. These terraces overlooked the palace gardens, allowing the pharaoh or his entourage to stroll past by chance. Vines hung from the balcony railings, providing shade and a frame for faces that might lean out to watch the evening processions. It was a kind of living display, one part hospitality, one part theatre. A quirky fragment from a merchant's letter mentions the delivery of fabric dyed in the colours of the Levant, specifically for the use of these foreign attendants. Whether intended as gifts or as costumes to heighten their exotic appeal, the result was the same. They stood out in every gathering, their presence impossible to ignore. The reality of life for such favourites was complicated. For some, elevation brought comfort, fine food, and a measure of safety. For others, it meant being caught in a web of expectation, unable to return home yet never fully part of Egyptian society. And for the pharaoh, relationships with these captives could carry political weight, cementing dominance over a conquered region, or subtly signaling favor toward a particular faction. As you climb back up from the terraces, the sound of laughter in a foreign tongue follows you. It is lighter than the politics that surround it, yet in this palace, even laughter can be a strategic tool. Somewhere between freedom and captivity, affection and display, these figures walked a path as precarious as any balancing act performed for the court's entertainment. The distant murmur of foreign voices fades as you step into a circular chamber lit only by a single opening in the ceiling. Through it, the night sky stares back, a sprawl of brilliant stars etched against black. This is the palace's observatory, a place where celestial charts guide not just the planting of crops or the scheduling of festivals, but the timing of moments far more private. Ancient Egyptian rulers believed their reigns were aligned with the movements of the heavens. Certain stars, like Sirius, and constellations tied to gods, were thought to exert influence over the fate of the kingdom. But beyond the public rituals, court astrologers also advised on matters the official records never mention: when the stars favored union, when a journey would be blessed, and, whispered more quietly, when the heavens promised fertility or passion. Inscribed on the walls are faint traces of astronomical diagrams, circles marking lunar cycles. lines connecting bright points into the forms of sacred animals. These were not abstract curiosities, they were working tools. Scholars note that some surviving star charts contain marginal notes in smaller script, possibly indicating nights of intimacy, chosen for their cosmic alignment. Whether these were truly effective or simply symbolic, their secrecy suggests they mattered to those involved. An unusual papyrus from the reign of Ramesses IV records an astrologer's recommendation that the pharaoh meet a favored consort on a night when Venus shone brightest over the western horizon, a sign associated with Hathor. The meeting, the text implies, would not only please the goddess, but also strengthen the bond that steadies the throne. The blending of personal and political aims in such advice is impossible to miss. The chamber itself is designed to encourage stillness and focus. Cushioned seats ring the space, angled so that anyone reclining can look directly upward. A low table holds polished bronze mirrors, used to catch starlight and reflect it onto small bowls of water. The shimmering patterns were read like omens, their meaning interpreted through a blend of observation and ritual. A quirky detail from a courtier's reminiscence tells of an evening when the pharaoh and his chosen guest lay side by side beneath the open roof, each holding a cup of sweetened wine. The astrologer, seated a few paces away, murmured that the constellation of the hippopotamus would guard them through the night. Whether the reassurance was truly divine or simply part of the evening's charm, the guest reportedly smiled and stayed until dawn. Scholars still debate whether the practice of scheduling personal encounters by the stars was a genuine belief in celestial influence or a romantic conceit dressed in religion. In a court that valued symbolism in every gesture, it may have been both a way to wrap desire in the language of destiny. As you leave the observatory, the image of that open circle of sky stays with you. In a world where power was claimed from both gods and men, aligning one's most intimate acts with the turning of the heavens was another way to declare that even love and pleasure moved according to the ruler's command. The hush of the observatory gives way to a dim, narrow passage, its walls painted with simple geometric bands rather than the elaborate scenes found elsewhere. At the end of the corridor stands a sealed wooden door, carved with faint traces of hieroglyphs that most visitors would overlook. When it opens, the air inside is cooler, tinged with the mineral scent of stone, a hidden chamber that holds the kind of imagery meant to be seen only by select eyes. Here, in the quiet shadows, the walls are alive with carvings and paintings far more suggestive than anything displayed in public temples. These forbidden tomb carvings, often tucked into private chapels or burial chambers never meant for the general populace, depict myths and rituals in their most unfiltered form. Figures of gods and humans entwined, symbols of fertility and creation are rendered with frank precision, and the boundaries between sacred and sensual vanish entirely. Such imagery was not mere decoration. In the Egyptian worldview, the afterlife was a continuation, an enhancement of earthly pleasures. To prepare the deceased for eternity, tomb scenes often included depictions of feasts, music, and intimate companionship. Some rulers and nobles took this further, commissioning scenes that blurred the line between divine blessing and personal fantasy. A fragment of an artisan's log from Deir el-Medina describes a commission for a Garden of Delight scene, intended for the inner wall of a tomb alcove. It included musicians, dancers, and lovers beneath flowering trees, their poses coded with the symbols of Hathor's festivals. The log notes that certain details were to be small to the eye, suggesting a deliberate choice to conceal them from casual viewers while rewarding those who knew where to look. Scholars still discuss whether such carvings were purely symbolic representations of abundance and rebirth, or personal requests rooted in the ruler's private desires. The secrecy surrounding them, and the fact that some were later plastered over or defaced, suggests that their content could cross the line of what was considered acceptable even for royalty. One unusual find comes from a sealed chamber beneath a lesser-known tomb, where a painted frieze shows a banquet attended by deities in human form, reclining beside mortal guests. The imagery blends myth and reality so seamlessly that it's impossible to tell where the divine company ends and the mortal begins. Some figures are identifiable as the tomb owner's real companions, rendered with the same care as the gods themselves. A quirky detail preserved in a stonemason's note mentions carving a lotus, so open the bees may enter, a phrase that seems innocuous until one considers the lotus's long-standing connection to sensuality. Such double meanings allowed artisans to fulfill their patrons' wishes without openly defying convention. Standing in this chamber, you can almost hear the faint chisel strikes of the workers, the whispered instructions passed in low voices. The art here feels more alive than in grand public halls, not because it is grander, but because it is personal. It is as if the walls have been allowed to speak freely, unbound by the need to maintain a purely divine facade. When you step back into the corridor, the dimness feels heavier. The door closes behind you with a muted thud, sealing those carved whispers away again. Whatever truths they hold remain for the eyes of the dead and for the rare visitor who knows which walls will speak. The narrow passage from the hidden carvings leads you toward a chamber lit by a deep amber glow. Here, the air is thick with the scent of resin and incense, the kind used for temple rites and funerary processions. This is the place where the final act of the pharaoh's earthly story was performed, the last embrace, a ritual binding love, death, and the afterlife into one. In the Egyptian mind, death was not an ending, but a passage to an eternal continuation. The last embrace was both literal and symbolic, the moment when the body, wrapped and adorned, was committed to the tomb, carrying with it the tokens of relationships and passions that had shaped the ruler's life. Official records speak of gold, jewels, and amulets placed among the wrappings, each for protection. But alongside these were gifts less formal, personal items whose meaning would be understood only by the one who gave them. A record from a royal embalmer's scroll notes a ring from the hand of the lady of the house tied to the pharaoh's wrist beneath the linen. Such private offerings, hidden from public view, served as invisible threads connecting the dead ruler to the living heart that had once touched him. The ritual itself unfolded with solemn choreography. Priests recited passages from the Book of the Dead, guiding the soul through the duat. Musicians played low, slow notes on flutes and harps, the sound meant to soothe both the spirit and those left behind. Certain moments were reserved for those closest to the ruler consorts, favored companions, perhaps even a servant whose loyalty had been more personal than political. These individuals might be allowed to place the final amulet, kiss the mask, or pour the last libation of perfumed oil over the wrappings. An unusual account from the reign of Suzerain describes a final night spent in the burial chamber before sealing, when select mourners remained with the body, speaking to it as if the pharaoh were only sleeping. The record notes words of love and remembrance as part of the official inventory, suggesting that such moments were considered essential provisions for the afterlife. Scholars still question how much of this intimacy was truly personal and how much was ritualized performance. But the effect was the same. The deceased left the world accompanied not only by the blessings of the gods, but also by the echoes of human affection. One quirky piece of tomb art from the Valley of the Kings shows a figure, possibly the queen, embracing the wrapped form of the pharaoh, both rendered in the same rich pigments usually reserved for divine scenes. Above them, the goddess Hathor extends her arms, merging the earthly and the eternal in a single gesture. When the tomb was finally sealed, the last embrace marked the end of all physical contact. From that moment, the ruler belonged to eternity, and those left behind returned to a palace forever changed. Yet, in Egyptian belief, the touch, the scent of resin, and the murmured words in that final moment would remain with the ruler's ka, the life force, forever. You step away from the chamber, with the sense that in these final rites, the boundaries between sacred duty and personal longing dissolved entirely. The last embrace was not only for the dead, it was a ritual that bound the living to their memories, a promise that love would travel with the departed into the endless fields of the afterlife. Night. The oil lamps burn lower, their flames swaying gently, as if even they are ready to rest. You walk away from the hidden chambers, past the gardens, past the river, until the sounds of music, laughter, and whispered secrets melt into a single, distant hum. The air is cooler now, scented only faintly with lotus and myrrh, the fragrances that have followed you through so many rooms. The sky above is vast and unbroken, stars scattered like golden grains across black velvet. The Nile drifts slowly under the moonlight, carrying with it reflections of all that has passed, festivals and feasts, dances and glances, the power plays and private touches that shaped a ruler's reign. The weight of centuries feels lighter here, as though the past has exhaled and let you go. Your steps grow slower, your breath deeper, until even the memory of gilded masks and shadowed doorways seems to dissolve. The palace remains behind you, sealed in its own time, while you return to yours with only the soft echo of its secrets. The night wraps around you gently, as a final voice, half divine, half human, seems to whisper that desire, like power, leaves traces long after the moment has passed. Sleep now, and let those traces drift into your dreams.